Pop Shield, a long-form discussion podcast about musical topics both past and present. I'm Gabe, and I'm joined as always by Dan.
Hello.
And Darren.
Hello.
So last week, Pitchfork reviewed Pink Floyd's Meddle from 1971 as part of their Sunday Classic Reviews series, and it inspired us to tackle a topic we've been wanting to get to for a very long time now. Why it is that Pink Floyd, who used to be one of our absolute favorite bands, just doesn't seem to do it for us anymore. In fact, I think we are far from alone on this. If Rate Your Music is anything to go by, many music obsessives go through an intense Pink Floyd phase before deciding that the band is just very pretentious and very uncool dad rock. I want to interrogate that today, but at the same time, I want us to dive deep into Meddle itself, an iconic but definitely transitional album that's rarely discussed on its own without comparisons to Pink Floyd's earlier and later work. In fact, I was sort of disappointed by the Pitchfork review in that it spent the entire time just talking about the Pink Floyd myth, their whole career arc and everything. But yes, I am fully aware that these two aims, talking about Meddle, giving it its due, and talking about Pink Floyd's legacy, these are completely contradictory goals. That being said, before we get into Meddle, let's go over our previous and current feelings about Pink Floyd in general. Dan, how did you used to feel about Pink Floyd, and how do you feel about them now?
Yeah, I probably got into them, I guess, either early high school, maybe late middle school, and I thought they were super rad. I guess I got in through the radio singles, and then got Dark Side and got into the rest of the record, The Wall and on from there. I loved them. They were. I don't think they were ever one of my absolute favorites, but they were definitely a band that I liked a lot. I had some T-shirts and whatnot of them. My current feelings on them. I love Piper at the Gates of Dawn, and I love Syd Barrett, but I basically do not want to listen to anything that does not include Syd Barrett in it from Pink Floyd. I just feel like it just seems like. I mean, even thinking, Meddle, I didn't have as much of an aversion to, but, thinking about listening to Dark Side of the Moon was, giving me, I don't know, cringe anxiety up until I did it, for this podcast. I was just I think, in my mind, I was, really building it up, it was almost like taking a look through an old yearbook or something. I don't know. It was just, something I just didn't want to, didn't want to see. You, the old picture when you're wearing Jinkos or whatever.
Yeah, when you're with a scenester haircut or something.
Yeah,
that.
Exactly.
All right, Darren, what about you? Your previous feelings and your current feelings about Pink Floyd?
Yeah, like Dan, I probably came to like Pink Floyd around middle school. Definitely listened to them on classic rock radio. So all of those radio hits. Obviously I was a big fan of AC/DC, so any of those kind of classic rock stuff, Pink Floyd was just constantly a part of that. And that slowly grew into a bit of an obsessive phase. I think that's just kind of how a lot of my early listenings happened. You just kind of go through these phases and fall in love with bands and listen to them quite a bit. Dark Side of the Moon, I think The Wall was something that I just constantly had either on a CD player or just always playing that. And then it just kind of disappeared. I just sort of moved on and sort of left Pink Floyd behind largely. And I guess the way I feel about them now is it really feels like a relic of a bygone era almost, right? Just like you had mentioned, Dan, listening to it is kind of like flipping through a yearbook. We talk about bands from those from our youth and how they've sort of changed and impacted us later on. And Pink Floyd is just not one of those bands that I ever really came back to. And I don't know if it's just because of the radio play, the mainstream, maybe the T-shirts at Target, Roger Waters coming back and doing these tours and stuff. And then basically your parents or anybody who are older, that's their, Pink Floyd is what they feel like they somehow connect with, other people, the youth, I guess, in terms of being in on really good bands and stuff. I don't know. It's just a mixture of all of that sort of just left a poor taste in my mouth and never really had me interested in coming back.
Yeah, I went through an absolutely obsessive Pink Floyd phase where they were my favorite band pretty easily. I had like no relationship with classic rock radio or anything, and I literally just like blind purchased Dark Side of the Moon because I saw it on a lot of lists of like best albums ever or something. Had never heard Pink Floyd or just anything like that. It blew my fucking mind. Like, I'm not even gonna lie. Like, just I could not fucking believe what I was hearing. And yeah, and I got, very into the like high conceptual, just aura of Pink Floyd. We'll get into more of that later, but yeah, I don't know. Like after that, like just massive phase with them, I sort of moved on and never really felt like going back. And I think Dan basically just summed up how I felt, where it just felt like kind of a pretentious like thing I would be embarrassed about liking if I ever came back and listened to it. It's not that I hear songs on the radio and stuff, and I think they're cool or whatever, but it's like just not something I would ever choose to listen to. I will say that when these box sets came out like a couple of years ago, you remember these like kind of early years or something? That stuff I really do still like a lot.
I went through that too. Yeah,
I just think that's like a cool period. It's kind of like of course I dig the Piper, the Gates of Dawn period and the Syd Barrett stuff, but it's like I like that kind of period where they're like just dicking around and like exploring and trying weird stuff. It's not like everything hits, but there's some interesting stuff there. And so I was kind of excited to talk about Meddle. It's a little bit like right at the end of that. How did you, Dan, feel about Meddle in particular? I don't know if you really spoke to that.
Yeah, I like always like really liked Meddle a lot. I think it was mostly because that Live at Pompeii like movie that they did, which ahead of their time with the socially distanced empty venue concert things. But I fucking loved that movie. In fact, I meant to watch it before this because I was wondering if it's still real rad, but then I was kind of like, I'll let it be rad in my mind because I'm sure it's not. Because like in my mind, it's still fucking like that slaps, but it probably doesn't. So like that concert, like it pulls very heavily from Meddle. I think almost everything, maybe one or two things isn't for Meddle, but almost the whole thing is Meddle. And I just like love that. Like that video became like sort of my favorite Pink Floyd thing. And so, by extension, it made me really like Meddle a lot. I would say that for a time, like Meddle was probably my favorite Pink Floyd record, for at least a little bit of my life.
Yeah, I'll just say quickly that it was one of my favorites. It had that quality of like, it's obviously super famous, but it's like a little bit unfamous, so it's like cool. We've talked about these type of albums a lot, and yeah, it's we'll get into it's a strange mixed bag, but it was like Echoes was pretty much instantly like knocked me on my ass and was always kind of one of my favorites in that period. Darren. I had no idea. I'll pull back the curtain here a little bit and just say that I think we had like kind of a busy week and we didn't pick a topic until late, and Pitchfork reviewed this album and I'm like, oh great, we all knew Pink Floyd and it would be interesting to revisit it together. And come to find out, Darren doesn't even know Meddle. What is your deal? You had no Meddle experience in your life, Darren?
Yeah, I don't know. I am very familiar. I was very familiar with Fearless, and I was familiar with Echoes, but I never really spent much time with this album. I mean, I guess the majority of my time with Pink Floyd was like Dark Side, Wish You Were Here, Animals, and The Wall. I really didn't venture backwards beyond that.
And just I don't know. Does that sound like crazy to you, Dan? I just can't even believe how somebody could be. How could you be into like the whole golden period and never be curious?
I mean, I guess I will give you that you had to like pay for a CD back then, but I guess you could have borrowed it from one of us. But it was like a little bit more of a task to like go through a band's discography. Like now, basically, if I like a band, like one album, I pretty much will listen to all their records, like just because it's so easy to do. So I will give you that it was a little harder and more expensive.
Yeah, nothing. No defense for yourself, Darren. How this happened?
Yeah, I really don't know. I mean, I remember you talking about Echoes a lot. I mean, we were in a band around that time, and I know we were like pretty heavily inspired by Pink Floyd. For sure. And I just never really listened to it. I didn't. I think I had listened to Echoes, and at the time, I didn't like it. I was just like, this sucks, you know, give me the Dark Side. You know, it just felt like, you know, Dark Side just did all of it much better. You know, we'll get into that, I suppose. But
all right, well, since it was kind of your first time with this, maybe you can do the honors, Darren, of describing the overall sound of Meddle. And again, we've done this many times, and we're gonna like break our own rule over and over again. But like, let's try to, you know, talk about Meddle as Meddle. Like, describe it as if this was the only Pink Floyd album that existed. Don't say it sounds like Dark Side or whatever. You know, how would you describe the sound of Meddle, Darren?
Yeah, that's gonna be a little bit difficult, but you know, this out. It's actually like, it's kind of. I feel like it's really difficult to just describe the album in, you know, as a whole, because it really varies. Like I think you mentioned earlier, Gabe, it being sort of a mixed bag, and I mean it's so mixed that it's like you've got this very like airy prog sound with like, you know, echoes, very long, you know, proggy sound, and then you literally have a song that's like straight up very much acoustic guitar and you know, something that like doesn't even sound like the rest of the record, right? As far as like, you know, the vocals, which I think is really a big part of Pink Floyd, again, very breathy sounding vocals, right? I think it you know, I'm assuming David Gilmour's singing most of the time. I guess Roger Waters may be singing a little bit too, but it really sounds like it's mostly.
He sings
like,
only on Saint Tropez.
Okay, so yeah, so like pretty much everything else is David Gilmour's like very airy, breathy like vocals going throughout it.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, how would you? Is it possible, Dan, for you to describe like just the overall sound of Meddle?
I mean, I think it's difficult because it's basically like bookended by these two like sort of spacey, you know, somewhat exploratory tracks. Even though one of these days is much shorter, I think it's still like you know, in the vein of Echoes. But then yeah, you've got this middle section here that is like really such a mixed bag that it's. You almost want to like I want to describe it as like a spacey, you know, kind of record, but really that's only about half of it, you know. The rest is so each of these, you know, other four songs are completely different. I mean, Seamus doesn't sound anything like Echoes or even, you know, A Pillow of Winds or Fearless or Saint Tropez. So I think it's a difficult record to like give an overarching you know, theme or feeling to. Yeah.
I just kind of wanted to like test you guys and see if you could come up with something brilliant to say. No such luck, but it's probably only possible to kind of like walk through the track listing or break it up as you kind of were there, Dan. At the same time, I will say that I think there is kind of like there's kind of an ambient drifting quality that's in these like acoustic pieces that is similar to Echoes, even though the instrumentation is so different. You know, it all has this, you know, it's almost like ambient music. Like I think of Pillow of Winds or something. It's like just a drifting cloud of.
I get that.
You know what I mean?
But I mean, I guess we can get into criticism. It feels tacked on to me. Like it feel like that. You know, that ambient drifting quality. I agree. It is in something, especially like Pillow of Winds. But it really seems to me. And maybe this is like sort of what my like problem has become with Pink Floyd is like it just sort of is like tacked on. Like they gotta be like they felt like we couldn't just have a, you know, a soft love song or whatever. It's gotta have some weird, you know, like experimental thing. But also it doesn't actually experiment like far enough for me. You know, it's like if they really like went for it. You know, that can be cool, you know, you can get interesting, but I just feel like it's like this very like safe kind of tacked on experimentation that we get in these middle tracks.
Interesting.
You know, like Seamus, like, you know, on paper you're like, oh, you know, we'll have a dog sing this song, and it's like
right.
It's like, oh, you know, fuck that might be cool, you know, but it's not. It's like literally like this is just like kind of a shitty blues song that somebody put a dog on top of, you know what I mean? Like it doesn't like actually do, I think, what they're trying to do. It's like it's like such a I hate to use like a word like it's like poser experimental. Like I hate that like concept, like only real black metal or whatever. I hate that concept, but I'm gonna use it here. It just like feels like that on this record, and I mean it just Pink Floyd in general. But really these like middle ones, I feel that so much.
Okay, well I've got some comments on that, but I want to table it for now and do a chronological walkthrough, just a brief one. But maybe Darren, you can kick us off with like, how would you describe the song "One of These Days," the opening track on this record?
Yep. So I think it really starts off as a really strong opening track, right? I think you've got that like bass note that's like sort of, I don't know, I guess being echoed, or it's like two of them playing, like both David Gilmour and Roger Waters are playing like a bass guitar and running it through
chugging
something. Yeah. And it rocks out, right? I mean, it really feels like a, kind of, it's got like a 70s rock sort of feel to it, right? But still has that like Pink Floyd sort of somewhat dreamy, spacey, like you guys have described, sound to it, right? As an opening track, I think, and we talk about this with albums all the time, right? The opening track oftentimes sort of sets the stage, or seems to set the table even for what you would expect for the rest of the album. And I guess once we get through these tracks, we can kind of talk about maybe how the sequencing plays out. But, for me, this track, I think, is a great opener. It feels, familiar. It rocks out. I actually kind of really enjoyed it, it being sort of one of the first times I've listened to it.
Interesting.
I think it sort of sets the stage for what I would have anticipated being an album, I guess, very similar to this sound, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I think that, I guess I want to run this by you, Dan, because I think it starts off in a pretty like odd territory. It's almost like a proto Swans track or something, just like these chugging, like thudding basses. You get these like really deep like bass drum hits, just like doom 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 doom, like, and you've just got this like chugging propulsion, but it's like very minimalist at the same time. You do have a lot of these kind of like spacey noises and stuff going on, but it's like, the I think what's front and center here is this kind of like just droning, very doomy guitar. You know what I mean? Like these very like just Earth or Sun style like droning chords and stuff over this like just minimalist, almost krautrock like chug. And I wonder, Dan, what you think when it does seem to, to Darren's point, the crescendo of this whole buildup after the admittedly very awesome, one of these days I'm going to cut you into little pieces part, is kind of like a classic rock, like ripping solo. You know what I mean? Is it a little bit of a letdown for you as a Swans type music fan there?
Yeah, of course. I mean, I think that is like sort of my like issue with Pink Floyd like these days. No pun intended, but it starts out like so promising, because you're right, like it does have this like really like sort of forward thinking like minimalist kind of thing that
proto-punk almost.
Yeah, it's really cool. In fact, like the first time I listened to this record, when we were going to do this podcast, I probably hadn't heard this in I don't know, at least 10 years, probably more than that. I was like, oh fuck, maybe they still kick ass. And then it gets to that crescendo, and it's like, oh wait, no, they always fucking blow it and become a 70s rock band, because that's the thing. And
the guitar solos start ripping through.
And I think that's like why it's, when you first get into Pink Floyd, it's sort of like, I mean, I think like it honestly was like probably my first like experience with anything that was like, really vaguely experimental, like outside of Sgt. Pepper's or something, like this is the first thing. I mean, with 23-minute long song or something. So it's really like a great like wading pool into like the actual, it's the shallow end of this huge ocean of what's that stupid meme you always see with the iceberg, know?
The iceberg,
like Pink Floyd's on the top of that iceberg, and I'm down here on some weird ass bottom, so,
but I mean, do you think, like, speaking of like poser experimental like you were earlier, I mean, do you think the first half is like genuine bona fide forward-thinking music?
Yeah, well, I think one of these days is the other songs I don't know.
But I mean like this song in particular, because I feel like the first half is like, damn, they were far ahead of their time. Like I'm actually,
Oh, you mean the first half of one of these days? Okay, yeah, I get you.
Right,
I thought
right.
you meant the record.
And it, like to me, if the first half of this track, I'm like, wow, that is like legit. And then the second half, it's like I do really like it, but it's just kind of like in familiar territory.
No,
it's
exactly.
How like
I was.
It's musically very minimal, and then in the second half, the piano comes in and kind of like shows you what the chords are. You know what I mean? Like the full chords,
exactly, yeah.
And it kind of like spoils the minimalist, just dull bass thud of the beginning.
No, I was really thinking like when I was listening to this, like it kind like that song in particular, like sort of like really kind of reminded me of Can and like Tago Mago,
right.
like Tago Mago. I was thinking of like Hallelujah or however you say that fucking song. Like it's got this like minimalist
right.
thing, and it is like sort of like I don't want to say like easy to listen to. I think it's like a song that like
kind of rocking.
Yeah, like your average person would enjoy, and then it turns into like some weird ass music concrete thing in the middle, and then brings it back to like this cool like still like forward thinking like the crescendo there is like being experimental again, like going back to like a grounded like experimentalism. Here we get like that easy experimental, and then we just get okay, now here's just a fucking guitar solo like regular ass 70s rock song. It's just like it's just so disappointing because I feel like with a little bit more, like the song could just be like such a badass song, It's just like they just blow it, because I mean that would be like such a cool like crescendo, that weird like vocal, like they recorded like the drummer I was reading like they recorded it at half speed and he like did it in falsetto, and so when they slow it down it's like it's speaking at the right speed, but it's like such this weird like unnatural sound, and that's a cool and super ween thing to do,
right?
But like but then it's just like such a letdown. Like as soon as that hits, it's just such a letdown.
I mean, I always feel like I don't know how one would resolve this better, like what the crescendo could be. I mean, I guess Swans might be able to figure it out, but it's like, and yet I don't want to give the wrong impression. I do like the second half of the song. I think it's got like a nice, like the soloing isn't like classic rock soloing as much as this kind of sloppy like garage rock stuff. But Darren, it sounds like you're more of a fan of the second half of the song. Is that right?
Yeah, I guess Dan would call me a normie for that. But,
right.
I mean, that's not to say I don't like the first half. I think that the second half is kind of a nice payoff, you know what I mean? I think a 3-minute track where it's kind of just this like jamming, chugging guitar and soloing, I think would be a lot less effective if you didn't have that interesting build up, you know what I mean? And that's the kind of stuff that you like in like things like Godspeed You, right? I mean, you love the build up into some sort of crescendo, right? And I mean, right. Godspeed certainly has tracks that have this in it. Of course, it would go on for like another 20 minutes probably after,
right?
Yeah. The first crescendo.
Well, we may have more to say about Godspeed on a particular later track here. But first, this I think. So one thing I do want to mention before we move on here is that the album opens with this kind of like whooshing wind sound, like a very slow build of this like whooshing wind to the point where like every time I start the record,
like
I'm like
super quiet.
Playing?
Yeah, I know.
But then it quite cleverly, I think, ends back with this whooshing wind sound, which leads us into a track appropriately called A Pillow of Winds. I want to just say that I really appreciate the effort. I like when artists do this. Like you've got songs that they don't sound alike at all, but just like a light touch of like a transition or something to kind of tie it together. I think like it permits making that big leap. And in fact, I feel like part of the point here is like how different the second track is from the first track, but it's a nice touch. I think the way that we're like, they somehow pull it off. How the hell would you take the song one of these days and be like, how do we make it seamlessly flow into A Pillow of Winds? And it's like just a small thing, but I think it really works. That being said, we move into like a middle section of these kind of acoustic-ish songs: A Pillow of Winds, Fearless, Saint-Tropez, and Seamus. Do you object, first off, to me grouping these together? You guys were kind of mentioning that you see them as pretty different from one another.
I think they're different from each other, but in the context of the record, I think it's very apt to group them together because, the record's sort of bookended by these like kind of spacey experimental tracks, with One of These Days and Echoes. And so even though these four middle kind of songs, I mean, even though one of them's even longer than One of These Days, they don't fit like that same kind of sound or theme or whatever. So I think they definitely should be grouped together.
Yeah, what do you think, Darren? Do you see this as like a sustained section or just different tracks?
Yeah, I mean, in the context of the album, like Dan had mentioned, I think that this grouping is fair because they do seem to differentiate quite a bit from the opening and the closing track, and I do think it's also important to point out the recording process for this record, right? Like, if I understood it correctly, it seemed to have taken a long time to put this record together, right? It was like recorded while they were still touring and stuff.
And there was like a lot of, like, famously they were just like really trying to go far out there, experimenting and dicking around, and the only thing they got out of that was the ping sound that starts echoes.
Right.
And they were off running from there. But yeah.
And so, I just think that that's important to like mention when we start talking about the tracks, because I think that process comes out in the sequencing and the songs in this record, and particularly these four tracks here, where it almost feels like over the course of a year, however long it may have taken, you just at different points of the year, you just find yourself working on a different track, or being inspired by whatever it is and kind of focusing on that. It's not like a situation where the album was sort of written, they practice it, they go to the studio and they record it in 2 weeks. You know what I mean? Where like there's like a very singular idea and they kind of have it all the way throughout. But like I can imagine, like you mentioned, they started with that sound for Echoes, right? And that kind of like blew up into that track, and then 3 months later, Fearless comes along.
Yeah.
Like, let's just work on this for a few weeks or something. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So I think that this grouping is definitely fair, but I think it's also important to point out that it does sort of lend itself to this like lengthy songwriting process. At least that's how it comes across.
Yeah, I think I'd agree with that. In fact, I think this middle section, these sound like the kind of songs that you write in a hotel room while you're on tour.
Yeah,
exactly.
Whereas,
exactly.
Yeah. That's
the other
point.
tracks are like when you're together in the studio and kind of like jamming and feeling things out.
Right.
I wanted to get your take, Darren, when Dan started to say earlier that he thinks, the Pillow of Winds, it's like got a drifting ambient quality, but it's like tacked on. It's not enough to make it fit with the aesthetic of Echoes, for example. Do you agree with that? Because I feel personally like, when it comes to like that song and some of the others as well here, it's like, it feels like the song is secondary. It's more about the sound or something. Like, the vocals are always, as you mentioned, very breathy, but like often mixed very low.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, it's just like the production is kind of emphasizing like the spaciness or something of it, like the cloudiness of the sounds. Do you get that same impression, Darren, or do you think that is just take a normal little acoustic number and tack on a little bit of ambient drift to it?
No, I definitely think that there's like an atmosphere that is kind of a through line through most of these tracks, right? And it's, if you listen to this, I guess in the way that I've approached it, where I'm much more familiar with everything that kind of came right after this record, right?
Right.
You obviously can hear how that sort of atmosphere developed and became something like Dark Side. You know what I mean?
Right.
There's not a lot of like, we talk about like sparseness and empty spaces on other tracks by other artists and stuff. Here it feels like it's deliberately being filled with like, a slide guitar with like some heavy reverb on it or something like that.
Right.
It definitely creates a bit of like an identifier to like the Pink Floyd sound. You know what I mean? Coming to this record the way I did, it's like, oh, this is familiar. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think that, maybe they're not nailing it as much here, but it's like if you've ever been, hanging out with a certain type of people, and at a campfire or something, you'll hear somebody with an acoustic guitar play a couple Pink Floyd songs, and you realize like how just normal they are. And then you think back to the record and you're like, damn, like they made a song like Wish You Were Here or Breathe or something so atmospheric, like so much bigger than just the little acoustic ditty that it like really is.
Right.
And I feel like, I think they get really good at that, like elevating what is a pretty simple, just acoustic number or something into something like much more musically and production wise interesting. But Dan, I mean, would you even agree with that statement?
Yeah.
Or do you feel like it's just not working here?
No, I think like eventually, yeah, like they do become like very good at that. I mean, Dark Side of the Moon is full of it. I mean, like you said too, Wish You Were Here. Like there's so many songs on both of those records that are just like little actually crappy acoustic songs, But yeah, they like do
play Brain Damage like on an acoustic guitar.
Exactly.
You know what I mean, Darren? Like how dumb it is, kind of like
exactly.
just a little D with like the little
I just think here, like it's just they haven't refined that fully yet. I don't think, and it just feels like I said. I mean, I just feel like it's a little bit like Darren said. Everything's like very full. Like there's no empty space. And I think like with ambient music and all, like sometimes you need a little bit of that empty space. Like the sound you don't hear like can be just as important as the ones you don't hear. Or you do hear.
Well, what about one thing that comes to mind when you say that is like what I think is absolutely stunning chorus of the song Fearless, which is like this kind of peppy, folksy strummed ditty turns into like this very wide open space with like kind of, like all the instruments kind of just drop out. And It's just like this EBO like drone that kind of rises and falls. Mm-hmm. And that I think is kind of masterful. Would you agree with that, Dan?
Yeah, I think that's better. I was just talking about Pillow Winds. We're going in order here.
Okay. I'm kind of just grouping this all together.
Okay, all right. Yeah, I mean, I think they're you said it. Like this is a transitory record, a transitional record rather. And it's it's a very traveling record.
It's
and that's not necessarily like a bad thing. You've kind of got to go through it, like you need to come here to get to, Dark Side of the Moon. That kind of thing doesn't usually just like appear out of nowhere for a band, so I feel like they're definitely like working towards it. I think they're much more successful in a song like Fearless. I think like on Fearless, like that like kind of sample, I guess it's like a soccer game or a football game rather. Don't want to get any don't want to get any emails. But I think like that's a cool, that is like a kind of like a neat atmospheric, like experimental like kind of thing to do, and I think they get kind of good at that with Dark Side. And I guess we've completely thrown out not.
Yeah, I just realized that.
Yeah, we threw that out. But I'll finish my point and then we'll go back to not doing it. They do that with like those little like what is it, like a janitor or something, like talking, and even like the clocks at the beginning of time, like they do become like pretty good at that, and I think that's like a very and I think this record in particular too, like Pink Floyd is sort of like a proto post rock, if that makes any sense,
right?
Like kind of thing. So I think they get better at it, but this is just like this is the the primordial soup of it. They're just not like quite 100% effective at it, and I think Pillow of Winds is where they it just falls a little short. Like I just feel like some of those like sounds, like Darren mentioned, like the slide guitar that's like heavily echoed. It's like it's okay, It's just like I don't think it's the best thing. I think like some of it, like using the empty space could be so much better. Like they just a lot of times I think they fall in that trap of like we've got to jam every little thing in, like we've got some weird synth, like we gotta jam it in there, we've got the slide guitar, it's like I think they fall victim to that sometimes.
That might be the case, but I do think they're kind of like they're getting to that.
I think
they get quite
don't get me wrong, I think they're getting there.
But let me ask Darren, now we'll go back to we'll reinstate the rule of not talking about Dark Side or whatever, but anything in this kind of middle acoustic-y section stand out to you, either for good or for bad? I mean, you mentioned you used to be, even back in the day, somehow were a fan of the song Fearless, despite never listening to this album. How did it sound to you this week? Because it's a highlight for a lot of people, I think.
Yeah, maybe it was a radio hit, right? I think I've heard.
Yeah, it's
radio,
a single.
possibly.
It's a single.
Yeah,
Interesting.
Yeah, I mean, Fearless, I think, still stands out. I mean, that riff is just so great, and I think that it really, plays as if they had just had that riff and just knew it was like, a really great riff and kind of built a song completely around that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I know you mentioned that like the emptiness of the chorus or whatever the chorus is, I guess, is cool, but it also kind of, to me, it sort of plays like where else would you even go after a riff like that? Like the riff is such a major part of it. You know what I mean? But it's still a really cool song. I still like it.
Yeah. I mean, I think that for me, that's a major highlight. It used to be one of my absolute favorites. I kind of felt going into this like, oh, I probably listened to that so much that I'm not going to like it anymore. But I do think it's like really a stunning composition and really breathtaking. To me, it's like the really breathy vocal with just like this Ebo sound. It's like, it makes me think of Brian Eno, the stuff that he would be doing in a couple years, where it happens to be a great song, but the emphasis is really on just like the sound and the atmosphere of this thing. It's like almost an ambient track. And also like the really bendy little bass lines are like they remind me of Another Green World by Brian Eno very much. What about you, Dan? Like any low lights here? I mean, we probably got to talk about Saint-Tropez and Seamus, which people seem to kind of hate.
Yeah, I mean, Seamus is the obvious low light. It just seems like such a pointless endeavor, It's like this just kind of blues song, but then there's a dog howling over it. It seems like one of those half-assed kind of like, like Darren mentioned those like little things they did to get ready for this record. It seems like one of those kind of things, like it's really like kind of a failed experiment. I don't think it belongs on this record at all. I don't know. Maybe it's like a decent, kind of closer for the first half of the, like as a not an actual song, but like, I can't think of the word I'm looking for, but like sort of an outro kind of thing, maybe. But
yeah,
I don't know.
It's tricky because I don't know how you would get to Echoes. Like if it just went from like Saint-Tropez to Echoes or something, I think it would be really weird.
No, exactly. Like you sort of do need something in between those, but I just feel like they could have done better than Seamus. It just I don't know. It just feels like so kind of pointless, and it's just like every time I listen to this record, just when that would come on, I'd be like, man, 2 minutes.
Well, real quick, while we're talking about Seamus, let me just mention that Dan's cat is meowing a lot right now, and if I miss editing that out, I apologize. That we too have an animal just howling.
Yeah,
over
that's
the top
Camus.
of our podcast. Yeah,
that'll be the name of the episode.
Pink Floyd did it, so I think it's okay. And by the way, when fucking Fiona Apple did this shit this year with dogs barking over her song, she's a genius. But when Pink Floyd does it, not a genius. I don't get that.
I think she did it a lot better. Both of them annoyed the shit out of my dog, and But I just
let me ask you,
stupid.
Darren. What do you think about Seamus?
Yeah, I mean, not really a big fan of that track. To me, once you get through like Fearless, both Saint-Tropez and Seamus are just sort of like, I don't know, maybe palate cleansers ahead of Echoes, I guess. And I get it. I think you need a little bit of space there between, Fearless and then finally Echoes. I think there's other ways that you could have created that space. I don't think either of these two tracks are particular highlights at all.
Yeah. I mean, I'll just like say again that I appreciate that the production on these tracks, while maybe not totally succeeding, it's trying to make it fit in with like the kind of atmospheric quality of this album. Like Seamus in particular, it's like weird how it's like the chugging rhythm guitar is the loudest thing by far. And like the vocals are very buried, and it's like it just makes it like just kind of an interesting mix, I think. Saint-Tropez is similar, where it's like the most dominant sound are these like really sustained piano chords that just seem to like ring out forever. I don't know if they just recorded these straight, it'd be like, I think, really awkward, but it like kind of, I don't know, it kind of like fits. It kind of works as like this 4-song long transition into Echoes in a way. And honestly, I feel like that's all they had to successfully do for me. But that being said, let's move on to Echoes. I hope we spend longer talking about this than we did Seamus, because it's really like the reason to be here. Maybe Darren, as a not first time listener, but maybe first time like really deep listener, can you describe the overall sound of Echoes?
Oh Lord. So this 23-minute, epic, starts off with that sound that we've been sort of talking about, right? That kind of kicked off the path to this record.
Right.
A lot of atmosphere, this is really the track that, obviously there's there's the feeling of like really kind of stretching things out, really letting things, play out without any adherence to, staying within a certain, parameter, right? So the lead up, I think, before like lyrics even begin is like at least 3 minutes, right? It's almost like a track in and of itself before you actually get to a little bit of singing. Once you get there, though, that very airy familiarity, very spacey, atmospheric sound, sort of established, at least with One of These Days, I think kind of returns, right?
Yeah.
And then it, where you might think that the track would sort of end, it kind of continues to like build up, right? And gets pretty rockin', very
it's pretty funky, I think. Like that like really funky part, like
well, yeah, right before that, like you get a pretty ripping guitar solo, you know what I mean?
That's true.
I'm sure Dan is like relieved once it's over.
Oh yeah. It's my favorite part.
I mean, in my opinion, it's kind of like these solos are like, I want to ask you guys, like, I have this theory, and I feel like some prog heads will like get mad at me because I don't really know that much about prog, but in my mind, prog kind of like starts with King Crimson and Pink Floyd, like almost simultaneously. And it then goes off into two different paths, or it like had the choice of going off into two different paths. And the prog genre basically like decided to go the King Crimson route, which is like a lot of virtuosity, like hairpin changes, like really tightly structured compositions, that will like switch time signatures like on a dime, you know what I mean, and stuff. When I listen to like this song and I listen to Pink Floyd in general, I really do not think virtuosity. Like David Gilmour is soloing a lot on this track, but I feel like it's very musical, but it's also just very like, ambient. Like he's just kind of like doing these like bendy notes in the background and stuff to just kind of add like this weird atmosphere to it. Even when he does start ripping solos, I feel like it's a lot of just held notes. You know what I mean? He's not like showing off like Eddie Van Halen or something like that. Sure. What do you think, Dan?
No, I completely agree. I mean, like Nick Mason, the drummer, I think he's a really like good drummer.
Right.
I
don't ever think like what a great drummer Nick Mason is.
No, exactly. Like but that's what I mean. Like he's a good drummer to me because I hate like that sort of show offy like proggy kind of thing where he like he has interesting like arrangements and everything, but it never like overstates its purpose. It's much like Ringo. Like a lot of people give Ringo shit as being like some bad drummer, but it's like not. He like fills his role perfectly, and that is like being an actually good musician or drummer or something. So I've always thought that about Pink Floyd, and that is.
What about like David Gilmour? Even I think he knows when to pull back.
No, exactly. I think the whole band, like at least like before it gets later on, like they really do just sort of have like this garagey like almost feel to it. Like you said, like so much prog becomes like this like who can have like 800 drums and it's the even the sound of the record is like the best it could possibly be and everything. I think Pink Floyd like really like a high point of Pink Floyd is that like they don't seem to like do that, like I mean obviously like David Gilmour is like a really good guitarist and everything, but it's not like he's not like doing some like really jerk offy like solo. It's always like maybe understated or like just perfectly stated. It's never like.
And I think about like how low he is in the mix on this song.
Yeah.
It's like, it's not just like the rhythm track is the bed on which the solo sits,
exactly,
which is the case for most like classic rock. It's like really emphasizing the overall sound, and he's just contributing. Is that how you hear it, Darren, or do you think this is much more like in the classic rock kind of?
No. I don't think this is like a how many notes can I fit into this, or let me press this pedal so that I'm like louder than everybody else, so that the solo is really standing out. No, I really, and I kind of feel this way about David Gilmour, even in the later years. Like I feel like he really just contributes to the sound in a way, and like finds a way to blend in and not necessarily overtake a track. I think, and I think I found that very inspiring as a guitarist myself, you know what I mean? Like someone who was not classically trained or very good, to be frank, right? If you can find ways to make sound, with just a few notes and stuff, bending here and there, whatever, and not feel like you have to know all of like the scales and up and down the guitar or anything like that. Like that's really cool, you know what I mean?
I completely. I think that's the better way to be. I've talked about it, but I think that's the much more like interesting way to play music.
Yeah, I think that's to Pink Floyd's credit. So I kind of cut Darren off, but basically, you were saying we get into this like pretty epic like build up part where we get these like sick. I just love them, like the sort of climbing guitar, like badass, and then funky ass groove, like absolutely nasty groove. I think with this like just sick organ, Rick Wright killing it. Then we move into like spooky jungle, like the middle of that Fishman's track that we talked about a couple episodes ago. With just like weird like animals calling out, like whining like banshees or something. Move back into the verse essentially, which again kind of builds up in like a pretty grand way. Let's talk for a minute, I think, about that. Maybe just the overall kind of build up here, but also that middle section is what I'm really curious what you guys think about it.
Yeah, I mean, the build up. I guess let's speak to first. I think it's really cool. Echoes was probably always like one of my favorite Pink Floyd songs. Growing up and stuff, and I honestly still like thought it was pretty cool. That build up is like really good. I think this is like. How we were talking about one of these days, and I thought it sort of like falls short. I think Echoes like does a much better job. They kind of do this build up, and then instead of it just being like some ripping solo, it is like this kind of weird section. Do I have like some little problems here and there with the middle section? Like, I think sometimes it gets kind of like that's sort of, again, I don't want to use the word, but posery experimental thing where it's like, oh, would it be crazy if there were some animal sound, or whatever, which I feel like they're it could be like done just a little better here. But I think it's overall like pretty cool. And I mean, I said it before, but I think like Pink Floyd and in this song in particular is like really sort of like foreshadowing, kind of post rock. We've got the 23-minute, song length here. We've got like sort of these, movements throughout the piece.
That part, like after the first part, after the kind of like dark ambient spooky part, with like those like is like pure explosions in the sky.
That's exactly who I was thinking. Yep, exactly.
Yeah.
And so I mean that's like a super neat thing, I mean, like I love like seeing, you listen to Black Sabbath and you can hear, the future of sun and earth and stuff. And I feel like here you're hearing the future that becomes explosions in the sky, Mogwai and things that I like still to this day like enjoy a lot. And I think like because of that, like I think I can still like Echoes. I don't think they've like really blown it yet, like they will in the future,
Well, let me ask you, Darren, because I feel like we were on the same page on this, where it's like I guess I personally feel like that middle section, the spooky part, is like a little dull. Like there's just not much to focus on. It kind of seems to just exist to be like a weird interlude,
Mm-hmm.
And yet, when I was younger, and tell me if you were the same way, Darren, as I think you were. It's like I really loved when, like, I was listening to something and it's like, you gotta make it through the shitty part because then when it gets good, it's so fucking good. Like, for some reason, I really like that, and I liked, I had this pretentious quality to it where it's like, noobs won't be able to get through this and they won't experience, like, and if you just cut, like, if you just cut that middle part, it wouldn't hit as hard when you finally got to the good part. But you know what I mean, Darren? Like, did you used to feel that way, and do you still feel that way? Do you feel like you don't have as much patience as you once did?
No, I mean, I think I was definitely like that. I was totally like that, right? We used to talk about it, right? Like, the payoff, like, it's just so worth it. Like,
right,
no one
right.
understands, you know what I mean? And but I agree with you. Like, I feel like this section is like really dull. I feel like it loses me listening to it now. Like, it's just such a stark drop off, and like, as opposed to like that Fishman's track, right? Like, at least like you can kind of hear the rhythm in the background or something. There's just
right.
There's more things being added on, like layers. It's like building up, and this just sounds like truly like just weird noises, and it just doesn't seem to be like going anywhere, right? And I don't know the recording process necessarily, but it sure seems like they had the first and the last parts pretty well figured out, right? And then that middle section was just maybe something that they just wanted to play around a bit with, right? Or
because it feels like it could have been like anything, you could just cut that out, literally. And you could do some other weird excursion. Like, it just needs to be some kind of break in the action so that when the harmony comes back, it's really glorious.
And I mean, so much so that like the version of this that's on like the greatest hits, which is called Echoes, is edited down. It's only 16 minutes long, and they get rid of a lot of that dicking around and stuff. And I mean, I think like that's the thing. Like, I don't think you could take like any Godspeed song or Explosion song and like, if it's 22 minutes, I feel like it would be difficult to edit it down to 16, like it just sort of feels like everything's kind of necessary. Whereas here, like, you're both right. It's like sort of just there to be weird or to be experimental. And not like truly like actual, experimentation.
Right.
It just, that's like my biggest problem, I think, with Pink Floyd, like at this point in my life,
Yeah, well, let me move on to some bigger questions here, which I think is the one that a lot of people end up asking themselves about Meddle. Is this album just kind of all about echoes, or do you think there's more to Meddle than just echoes?
I think it's a little bit about echoes, it's like, like One of These Days, I think, is a good song, but kind of like it works because it's similar to Echoes. And then, I mean, we basically talked about it, all these middle songs, while half of them are like very good, they're just sort of there because you got to get to Echoes. And I mean, I think we all agreed that like Seamus and Saint-Tropez are just because like you can't go from Fearless to Echo, like everything's sort of like because such and such echoes, such and such echoes. Like the whole record sort of like revolves around it. And I think when you have like an album that's just two sides and one of the sides is completely one of these songs, that's going to happen. I mean, it's not necessarily a bad thing. I just think they don't like, I don't think they're completely successful in building two echoes like for that, and that makes it where like, when you're paying for this record, you're kind of just paying for echoes and you're getting some bonus tracks kind of thing,
Yeah. I think it would be especially weird, like in the vinyl era, to listen to that first half and then actually have to stop and flip it
I know.
And start echoes. Like that would be so odd because it's like trying as hard as it can to build to it. And the fact that you would have like a mental break there would, I think, just fuck it all up. It works like better in the CD era, but what do you think, Darren? Is there like a reason to come to Meddle beyond echoes?
I really don't think there is. You know what I mean?
Wow.
It also feels like the band themselves like had this track and like had the half of the record and like, well, we have another side we got to do something with. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
Because I think that we would be having a very different conversation if maybe the album was like just 2 or 3 tracks and they were all over like fairly long, with maybe Echo still being the longest. But you could really create that mood and that theme, like a Godspeed record, right? I mean, those records don't have like these like kind of fluffy, strange tracks. Like they're all long, right? Most of the time, right? They're all very long. They all have, there's a through line, you know, there's a clear theme. Here it's like, I mean, you're here for Echoes, right? If Echoes is not on the record, I don't even know what I don't even know what this really is. You know what I mean? Like it doesn't
right.
Exactly,
it doesn't end well with Seamus. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, side A is not like a masterpiece on its own. Okay, so we've been kind of like talking about the sequencing and the lack of cohesion here. Something we haven't talked about though is like the kind of lyrical themes. I know this is not like a big point of emphasis when it comes to Pink Floyd, but did you guys have any observations about, you know, what's being talked about here? If there is something tying this thing together lyrically?
I feel like, you know, most of these songs, you know, most of this record, so much of the lyrics are kind of so breathy that they kind of just fade into being like another sound of the song, which I like. I we've said it before, you know, rarely do like lyrics outside of like rap music make a song better. You know, it's usually like embarrassing if you can like understand it or something. But so I like really do kind of just enjoy the breathy, like ethereal. You know, I really don't know the lyrics to these songs, like even after all these years, like. You know, I know a handful or something, you know, but it's like they become just a part of the ether, and I really like that. Echoes, I think it sort of tries a little hard to be like you know,
deep.
Yeah, exactly. Like it tries a little bit hard, and I don't think it's as successful in the like burying of the words as being like I think they're more like in the forefront, which is like one of my, you know, knocks on Echoes. But yeah, I think here we're not really here for the lyrics, which is good for Pink Floyd.
My theory is kind of like Echoes is the perfect Pink Floyd like song subject matter, because it's about some like pretentious deep like nonsense. It seems to be about like the birth of the universe or something like that, like really lofty aims here. And yet like the title is so perfect because the title is Echoes, which is like, you know, on one hand it's like the reverberations between souls, like we're all just one mind and, you know, we're all just echoes of each other. On the other hand, it's like cool fucking noises. You know what I mean? Echoes are just cool fucking noises. Like, and I feel like Pink Floyd just exists on that like knife's edge where it's like trying to be really deep, but at the end of the day, it's kind of just about how cool echoes sound.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
No,
like, they
exactly.
actually just sound cool. I mean, what do you make of the subject matter here, Darren?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not a fan, right? I think that Pink Floyd would have been better off, like, you know, just not trying to. I think speaking through like a song title like Echoes, like you mentioned, I think would be great, you know, and like they could really have dialed it back a bit with the serious tone of the lyrics, like as you're obviously reading them. Now, when they come through and they're singing and all that kind of stuff, it's like very buried, like you just mentioned, very well mixed in. So like you don't feel like you ever have to pay close attention. You know, the song like Fearless though, like I was going to ask you guys, like, what do you make of this idea? Like, I think the Pitchfork article kind of highlights that a lot of their albums, especially post Syd Barrett, seem to be like dealing with or talking about like what happened with Syd Barrett. You know what I mean? And I think Fearless kind of clearly indicates that too.
Their entire career is just talking about Syd Barrett, you know, like, I'll bring up other records now, but, you know, like Wish You Were Here, like, it's like the whole record is about Syd, or most of the record at least, you know, Dark Side of the Moon's about Syd, you know, and it's just like, so, like, if it wasn't for Syd,
I feel like they're either, yeah, I mean, it's cool that they have like a muse. It's like a very interesting story that they have, but it's like half of their music is about Syd Barrett and the other half is about like how much they hate being a part of the music industry. Like the entire wall, the Wall album is just about like fucking hating crowds, like hating everybody. Like it's, and you know, Have a Cigar is like, I hate record execs. There are like two songs here that are like, you know, Pillow of Clouds is, or no, One of These Days is supposed to be like a diss of a particular radio jockey that was like mean to them or something. And then Fearless is thought to be like kind of a tribute to John Peel. It was like an early champion of theirs. He loved this particular like Liverpool football team or whatever that the chant is from and stuff. So it's weird, the things they take inspiration from, like very, very weird. I do want to just quickly give a full disclosure, though, that when I was younger, I thought Echoes was the deepest shit I had ever heard.
Oh, yeah, me too. Me too.
Don't think I'm like, higher than thou or anything like that. So we started to touch on this, and I want to kind of start turning to like the bigger Pink Floyd conversation now. We can let go of the rules that we didn't follow very well anyway. But is it the lyrics that give Pink Floyd a bad rep? Because they become much more prominent in later albums. The albums to come like are very thematic, very much emphasizing, to the point where like The Wall is like an opera. It's kind of like all about the words. So this bad taste that we all sort of mentioned that we have in our mouth about Pink Floyd for some reason, is it the lyrics? Is it the aesthetic? Do they get proggier and more virtuoso later, or what is it?
I think a lot of it is sort of the lyrics. Like I said, I wasn't like really. I didn't mind listening to Meddle. Like I didn't really have like, oh, I gotta listen to Meddle. Like I was sort of like, that was more like an old friend I hadn't seen in a long time that was cool, whereas like Dark Side was looking through the yearbook or something that was gonna feel cringy. And Wish You Were Here very much too, because like something like Have a Cigar, like it's just so in your face, and like really like the theme of it, it's just there's no like no subtlety at all. It's just like it's very obvious what that song's about, and it's just sort of like you guys are like at this point multimillionaires, like complaining about it's just like I don't really need to be complained at by that,
right.
And even like Dark Side, the lyrics just get kind of like, oh man, it's sort of like what Echoes does a little bit, but at least Echoes like hides it enough that it's like I can stomach it. But I think that like Echoes, like that is like one of the problems though, is like it doesn't, like I love Piper at the Gates of Dawn and like Syd Barrett and stuff, because like there's these like you've got something like Interstellar Overdrive that's like this like kind of long like proggy like jam kind of thing, but then like there's also like so much humor in that era of the band. Like I mean Bike is just like so like a silly song, and Gnome and stuff, like there's like a definite like I mean every so you see Emily play, like everything, there's just like there's a humor to it, and like it doesn't take itself too seriously. And I think like as soon as Sid is gone, that like really goes out the window, and maybe it is maybe it's Roger Waters' fault, because I mean he's mostly responsible for The Wall, and The Wall I think is like the most like pretentious
I'm having a hard time thinking of like any humor.
To be honest, I couldn't bring myself to listen to The Wall. Like I couldn't do it. I couldn't do it. I want to spend a little extra time in a minute here talking about like revisiting other stuff or not. But Darren, what is your problem with Pink Floyd? The lyrics, the aesthetic, what is it?
Yeah, I mean, I think the lyrics are problematic. I was thinking of like the song "Money" when you guys were just discussing and stuff, and just thinking about like how their lyrics really become such like, I don't know, like bumper car or like a car sticker, right? Bumper sticker type of phrases and stuff like that. And I think the problem is, because I was just thinking about this all the last week and a half or whatever. Comparing Pink Floyd to like, I don't know, Radiohead, Nirvana, bands that I was also like listening to at the time that I have still enjoy. I may not like revisit as much, but still certainly enjoy. And, obviously there's lyrics in those bands catalog all over the place. But I think the biggest difference is that, you never really felt like you knew what like Radiohead was talking about. I think you could get a theme pretty much out of every album, right? But if you like picked out any one song, I mean, there's just so much there.
There's subtlety.
And you like, there's things to discover later on, right? With Pink Floyd, it's like, I get it. Like I got it back then. There's no need to go back for more, The Wall, and especially like I listened to about half of it and I was like, okay, I'm done. I can't keep going here, because, it's so much of like a hand holding experience where like Roger Waters is like literally just like telling you exactly, he's giving it to you like, full frontal. Like there's no subtlety there. There's nothing to discover really. Like you get it. And once you got it, I don't know how much there is to return to, if that makes any sense.
No, exactly.
Yeah, I agree with that. But it's like, I think that like Pink Floyd is a little bit unfairly maligned because I think that musically they remain like very, very interesting and very trailblazing, and it's like, I guess I kind of came down the side of like the lyrics kind of like, yeah, they're kind of cringy now. They're like very direct. They're like Roger Waters just has this axe to grind that I find impossible to like sympathize with, like you were mentioning, Dan. And it's just like, it's just odd. But, I was listening to like, Wish You Were Here, right? And like the track Welcome to the Machine, do I give a shit about him bitching about, the music industry and like this evil machine and blah, 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 blah. No, but like those 70 synths, like swells all over that track are just awesome. Like I just feel like, I don't know, if you could somehow get rid of the lyrics or something, like everybody's going to grow out of the lyrics, but people kind of assume that they've therefore grown out of Pink Floyd. And I would almost say it's worth it actually to just, yeah, you grew out of the lyrics, but the music still has, I think, a lot to offer.
I think that's fair, honestly, because you're right. I did really kind of enjoy like those synth sounds and stuff. I mean, like when I was younger, like the last time I had listened to Pink Floyd, I didn't like know about, like I knew what a synthesizer was, but to me that was just a keyboard, like I didn't know about them. And like now I'm interested in that. So it was kind of, I was reading and like I read on like what synths they were, and I was like, oh yeah, that's this, and it was like sort of a fun like activity of it. But yeah, it's like you gotta listen to like Roger Waters. Like I wish you could get like instrumental versions of the record, like it just really would be so much better. I think it's just, I just do not want to listen to Roger Waters complain.
Like, I guess we're just doing the conversation now, but it's like revisiting stuff. Like I was listening to Animals, right? And it's like Animals it has like very long instrumental passages, like not a ton of lyrics there necessarily, but it's like, and so I think it's very interesting and very cool. There seems like a almost influence of like punk filtering into Animals, like how kind of like raw and like dark it kind of is, and it's just like very, very musically interesting. And then I keep thinking like, how fucking old was he that he was like the Animal Farm blew his mind? Like,
yeah, exactly.
Doesn't everybody read that when they're like 12?
Animal Farm blew my mind when Echoes blew my mind. You know what I mean?
He was inspired to write an entire album about Animal Farm, but it's like musically, I gotta hand it to him. I mean, you started to mention Darren, but did you have any positive experiences revisiting any other Pink Floyd records this week?
I mean, yeah, like I agree with like, instrumentally, like I still find a lot of their music very interesting and very, it reminds me of that same inspiration when we were writing music of our own. You know what I mean? It's not really, that's not really something that I feel like I grew out of so much, but I listened to like Dark Side, obviously, and the album just, it flows really well, right? I mean, it's kind of like quintessential to that Pink Floyd sound that we were sort of describing that was happening all over Meddle. You know what I mean? Like even The Wall, like I may not like enjoy Roger Waters' lyrics and kind of his direction here or anything, but I do appreciate the idea of like a full concept album being completed, right? I mean, there's a lot of bands
so many failed
that never make it.
Yeah, you did it. Yeah. What about you? Any positives from the revisiting the catalog, Dan?
I'll say like I was like so not looking forward to listening to Dark Side of the Moon, but I felt like you had to for this podcast, and to be honest, it was less like bad as I thought it was gonna be. Like I still like I'm good for another 20 years of not hearing it or whatever, but it wasn't as like bad as I thought it was. Like in my mind I had built it up to be this much like shittier like album, like it was like kind of enjoyable, but like fucking Money, that's a banging song, like that's a good classic rock radio song, like it just actually is, and
that's what's interesting about The Wall is like I think it's like really borderline unlistenable, but then because it's like so over the top. But then when you're listening, I'm like, every 3 songs you get like an absolute classic rock staple. Like there are a lot of absolute slappers on that album. It's like, I don't even think he needed to put that many for it to be like such a huge hit. It's like Thriller is in that album, you know. It just happens to also have like another 20 songs.
Yeah, exactly. No, I did like the other day.
Released the hits.
The other day, I got a new cell phone, and so I got in my car, and like I hadn't set up the Bluetooth yet. So while I was doing it, my car had switched to the radio, and it just happened to go to classic rock, and Comfortably Numb was on, and I was like,
nice.
I'm not minding this, you know. Take your time, Bluetooth. It's okay, you know. Like it's kind of a good song, you know. Like in that, it's guilty pleasure kind of way, you know. I don't want anybody catching me listening to it, but you know, like
I just had to switch to Phil Nyblock as soon as possible.
No, exactly.
I will say that my children really enjoyed Another Brick in the Wall Part 2. You know, very good song for kids.
It's a disco song.
Right?
Yeah, awesome. They all hate school, so that's good.
That's true. That's true. That's another
Roger
I was listening
Waters.
to that. I know Roger Waters' genius. I was like, listen to that shit, and like, you know, the song like before, like The Happiest Days of Our Lives or something. The lyrics are just like, the teachers were mean.
Yeah, I know. What is this?
So
dude's like
mean.
65, hates school.
I cannot understand what inspired him to write this shit. Like, really? That's why this character is so fucked up, is because the teachers were mean. Like, anyway, my like big epiphany from revisiting the, not all, but a lot of the catalog this week was like, I just didn't really think of them in this way back in the day because I knew so little about music at that time. But it's like now I realize that, like, if you listen to them as a 70s rock band, it's like startling how much they're doing. You know what I mean? Like, they're using like, I think like for Meddle is like the first time they got their hands on like a 16-track recorder, which is absolutely amateur compared to like the infinite tracks that you can do now. You know what I mean? And, I mean, it was a big thing then, but it's like, just listening to like how much they are doing with such limited technology, and just kind of like appreciating it as like, yeah, these are really fickle, like primitive synthesizers that they're figuring. They're just exploring for the very first time some of these like machines that nobody else knows how to work, and they're just playing with them. And it's like the atmosphere they were able to create, the stuff they were able to do with like tape loops and all this. I mean, it's like, I don't know, like maybe it's just a historical appreciation, but it's kind of stunning. Like 1971, Meddle comes out, and just listening to what Echoes is, I think is incredible. On that note, though, the problems that we were just talking about, do you find them on Meddle, or do you think Meddle works better than The Wall, for example?
Oh, I think it definitely works better than The Wall, but the Wall is just one of the biggest exercises in cringe that have happened. But I think I think it works better than Money, or I mean Dark Side of the Moon. I think it works better than Wish You Were Here. This is like really, I mean, we talked about it being like a transitional record, and it really is like, I don't really remember Obscured by Clouds all that well. I never really loved that one as a kid, but basically after this one, that we're getting into Dark Side, Wish You Were Here, Animals, all these ones that like just really Final Cut. Like I didn't even like that back then. Like it just this is sort of the end of like there being like some redeemable qualities. Maybe not totally. I did have some positive things to say about Dark Side and Wish You Were Here, but like I think like this is Atom Heart Mother is the record before this, and I feel like it's like a really kind of a failed version of Meddle. It's like they're trying to get to, like, I never even liked that record back in the day either, and it's like they're trying to get like this sort of experimental thing going. Like I feel like that record is like such a, like they want to do Echoes, but they just like they don't have it in them yet, or they're not there. And then they get there at Meddle, and I think that makes it like an interesting record, and like I mean honestly, I think it's still one of their best. I said like at a time as a kid, it probably was my favorite. It's probably my third favorite now after Piper and Saucer Full of Secrets. But it's the best one that Sid had no hand in, physically at least.
Yeah. What about you, Darren? I mean, maybe you can just sum up your feelings as a sort of new listener on Meddle.
Yeah, I mean, considering how I sort of felt about Pink Floyd going into this, I was pleasantly, surprised by Meddle, right? And then of course going back to some of the previous records, like there seemed to be a bit more distance between Meddle and those later records that I revisited, right? And I sort of appreciated that, right? And giving Echoes a real shot this time around, and not as much as I did back in the day, I guess. I really enjoyed it. I really did. I think I like the record kind of overall. I think Echoes is just so dominant that it's okay to like say 3 or 4 of the 6 tracks here I could do without. It's really okay. Like Echoes really is worth coming back to. You know what I mean?
But you came to like Echoes then, because you said even back in the day you thought Echoes wasn't that good.
Yeah. I think I did. The section that we talked about is still, it kind of loses me a bit, but I mean I think overall it's fine. Will I come back to the record? No, probably not. I mean Pink Floyd just in general, I still feel the same about just I have no interest in really coming back to it, but there's a lot to appreciate here. I think that's kind of my final thought.
Yeah, I feel like, I mentioned that I've kind of never stopped liking the like sort of weird in between Syd Barrett and Dark Side era of Pink Floyd, because I think, it's very hit or miss, but there's a lot of like really interesting stuff. And it's cool. Like it's a cool myth that Pink Floyd has, that like they lose their leader and they just spend a few years like kind of wandering aimlessly in the desert, like trying random stuff. Mm-hmm. And then it's like, and then, basically like, cause they're all, on these previous records, like they're all doing stuff like everybody gets to write a song.
Yeah.
Like they're literally just, they're just like looking for like who will be our new leader. And of course it ends up being Roger Waters for good or for bad. And I just feel like Meddle is like, it's kind of just before Waters takes over and, arguably screws some things up, in my opinion. But like the mastery of what they were kind of after is like just coming into focus. I mean, I guess this is not a new thought. Everybody kind of talks about it in this way, but I just was like really impressed with Echoes in particular. I think it's like still holds up as a kind of masterpiece. I think One of These Days is like a very interesting, very cool, like very forward thinking track, despite like not totally nailing it. And then, I'll just admit that, like, I think those middle tracks there, maybe they just exist to lead us into Echoes, but I think this album as a listening experience, it kind of does it beautifully. I'm like, when I start One of These Days, I'm like basically just along for the ride, and I'm like really looking forward to Echoes, and it really pays off, having listened to the whole thing. Mm-hmm. Did you have any final thoughts, Dan? If you can sum up, is this a good record, Meddle?
I think it's a good record. Yeah, it's one that's like at least worth listening to. It like you said, it is like this interesting period, like before Roger Waters takes over and changes the band for what I think is the worst. And it's a nice historical document. I think what you said about like listening to it as like a 70s rock band and like realizing what they're doing. I mean, some of the synths they're using, like this is some of the earliest times you'll hear it like in popular music and everything. And I mean, to someone like me who likes music that revolves around those kind of things now, it is kind of like cool hearing that in a, especially in a popular music kind of way. I mean, I think it's very brave to have even tried things like that, and tape loops and samples and all these things. Like, I think they really like, I think it really does break some ground here.
I know. Like, what were they even doing? What about the year like 1970 made them chase a sidelong composition? You know what I mean? Like, what the fuck was going on in the late 60s that they're like, we must create a masterpiece that is 25 minutes long? Like, it's just crazy. I don't know what they were after, but it's like, it's cool, this like relentless search that's going on in this period. And yeah, so I was impressed by it. I have like just a couple, like 2 final questions here. One is like, maybe it's just the stuff we've already been talking about, but like, why do you think it is that Pink Floyd seems so uncool now? Like I was listening to this and I always like to jot down like things that songs remind me of, and when I was listening to like I was like jotting down swans and stuff for, Earth and Sun for one of these days. I was jotting down like on Pillow of Winds, just like the weird way that it's mixed. I was like, man, the Microphones could have done a track like this, jotting down obviously like Godspeed or Fishman's on Echoes. It's like, I don't know, if all that stuff is cool, why is Pink Floyd considered so uncool?
I think it has a lot to do with Roger Waters. I mean, he's just a colossal dickhead, like outside of music and everything. And I mean, the bitching and moaning on later records, like it just gets so old. Like, you just I don't know, that makes it so uncool. And then I think it's something like this is, I think, a lot of people first, brush with experimental music. And so I think like when you start here and then you get into something like Godspeed, it's like it's a little bit to like, and maybe for better or worse, but like, embarrassing or whatnot to like to talk about where you came from, which I think is like somewhat disingenuous and all. But I don't know. I mean, I think a lot of it has to do with Roger Waters being a dickhead.
Yeah, I mean, what do you think, Darren? Because to me, it seems like there's also an element of like rock is very out, pretentious, like concept rock is very, very out right now. But why do you think Pink Floyd, of all these classic 70s bands, we did that episode on like best album of 1970, we were like, what is the defining artist of the 70s? We didn't even like mention Pink Floyd.
Didn't even cross my mind.
Yeah. So why are they so out of style, Darren?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I think I agree with the idea of like, concept albums and this sort of thing is sort of just totally out. But, I think this is going to sound pretty elitist, but, them being just so incredibly mainstream, right? Just the name Pink Floyd and kind of like their stance now, like where they are positioned in, music in general, right? I think really takes away, probably unfairly, right? The achievements that they have earned, you know what I mean? They're really right up there alongside, like, and I do like AC/DC, but they are like right alongside an AC/DC type of thing. I mean, a typical fan who likes AC/DC is going to know Pink Floyd, right? And they're stadium, they're like stadium rock, right? I mean, that's just what it is, right? Even if like, similar to AC/DC, like their early years, their first singer, like most people probably don't even, know very much about that. Just like I'm sure a lot of Pink Floyd fans have no idea that Syd Barrett was, their original leader and stuff, right? Yeah. And so as, for me personally, I guess, I try not to, try to avoid being like a pretentious, like elitist when it comes to music, but, it's hard to ignore all of that kind of stuff, right? Like it's just hard to ignore Pink Floyd's position and what influence that they've had, you know what I mean? Roger Waters, all the stuff that you guys have mentioned. I just think that it's hard for me to just say, yeah, I love this for exactly what it is. Like it's so much more than that. And it's unfair, I think, for me to feel that way, I guess.
Yeah. And I think on that note, like Pink Floyd is kind of like they just epitomize like the opposite of punk, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like Johnny Rotten very famously wore like a shirt that said, I hate Pink Floyd. And I think the punk movement was like basically defined as like, it's like, fuck all this like really big, grand, like over the top, rock, but it can kind of be boiled down to like, just fuck Pink Floyd basically. And, it just seems like music in general kind of moves back and forth between these like, a lot of virtuosity, but then it pulls back into like a punk spirit of like amateurism and stuff. And it just feels like, I guess it's hard to say which side of that spectrum we're on exactly right now, but it's just like Pink Floyd is just the punching bag for anybody that like hates, really inflated egos and really, like thinking highly of yourself type music. So the final question then is like, we talk about how things change, trends change. I have this theory that I repeat every episode that every decade music completely changes. Will Pink Floyd be making a comeback in the popular, like in the indie kind of cool kids world anytime soon?
I mean, I don't know. Maybe I don't think anytime soon. I like I say every episode. We're getting into a new metal revival. That's what's coming back next. So like I think we're gonna have to wait at least another decade before we get into Pink Floyd. So maybe if we're still alive, maybe we'll get back into Pink Floyd. But I don't know. It just really does seem like such a hurdle to overcome. With the pretension and everything, and I would be a little surprised. I think I think we'll continue to be. I mean, the way I am, like the Syd Barrett era is like the cool indie. I'm in the know kind of thing. Like I think it'll stay like that for at least quite a while. But yeah, I could be wrong.
What do you think, Darren? You got any? Like, predict it like down to the year. When is, put your money where your mouth is. 2023, Pink Floyd is cool again.
That's crazy because like literally that was the year that just kind of popped in my head.
That's it.
When you said year, I was just like 2023. So maybe we're on to something here, okay? On the record.
Yeah.
Remember to look at this in 2023 and see.
Right.
I think that, anything that goes into this sort of like hated territory in the indie world certainly has a chance to rebound with future generations, right? To be rediscovered in some sort of way. And I think that, as we've discussed, Pink Floyd, they laid a lot of groundwork for a lot of future bands. And I think that they're also still a really good entry point for anybody who is wanting to get more and more serious about music listening. You know what I mean? Once you get past the radio hits and some of that, I mean, there's plenty of work here that is certainly, worth listening to and can certainly lead you into the directions that, the three of us ended up going down. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And I think it'll always remain a good entry type of band for that sort of thing.
Yeah, well, the Grateful Dead is like full blown cool again now after a period of being like considered one of the lamest bands
that's
ever.
True.
So
yeah, that's a good point. Actually,
it can always happen. Any final thoughts, or do we have time for just a really quick listener email?
Let's go for it.
So after our recent episode on 100 Gex, we received an email from listener Luke, which included a link to a very lengthy Google Doc essay comparing the group's debut LP 1000 Gex, to the Velvet Underground's trailblazing 1967 debut, The Velvet Underground, and Nico. I wish I could credit the original author. It's not listed on this Google Doc, but in any case, thanks, Luke, for sending it our way. Remember, you too can email us, popshieldpod@gmail.com. I know you guys didn't get a chance to read this really, really long thing. So to sum it up, the essay is basically arguing that, like the album 1000 Gex, The Velvet Underground and Nico was kind of like an ironic commentary on styles of the past, yet this is precisely what made it sound so trailblazing after the fact. I don't think we have to like spend a ton of time digging through this because, I don't know, it was more like it was a long thing and it kind of devolved into just like a really obsessive person about 100 Gex, to be honest. But I was kind of very curious if you guys think of Velvet Underground and Nico in that way. It's like, I never really thought of it that way, but it's like, I always think of the Velvet Underground as like this absolutely trailblazing group, like they just kind of like invented lots of different genres, like the first kind of punk band, like the first, they've got like this kind of like soft indie, like Baroque pop thing, period. And like, they just like, they do this weird drone stuff and like experimental stuff. And it's just like, do you think of Velvet Underground and maybe just the Velvet Underground and Nico in particular as like kind of a looking back at all?
Not at all. I've always like you said, it's sort of the first kind of, indie band. I think like the first ones to, like really like meld the world of, avant-garde music and, just regular old rock and roll. Like they're bringing in drone and everything, like I really like struggle to see how that's looking back. Yeah, I mean, I guess like the rock and roll portion of it is maybe like a little bit, but even that I find it's played in such a way that it becomes something new. I mean, it like really is like the first kind of punk thing. I hate to shit on Luke's email because he's written us a few times. He seems like a nice guy, but
yeah. Well, these aren't even his thoughts, honestly.
Oh,
he
true.
Just
Yeah,
somebody else's thoughts. So shit on it all you want.
Okay,
but
well, good.
Darren, when you hear like like Run, Run, Run? Is that kind of like an old time Chuck Berry type song? Or when you hear like, I'll Be Your Mirror, or, like Femme Fatale, or those kind of like consciously old timey, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I mean, I guess if you really looked at it, you could probably peel away some of the more experimental layers, and that'll probably get you what you're looking for, right? But I mean, to me, like, I always think of like Velvet Underground, and that album in particular is just like almost like lightning in a bottle for music, right?
Yeah.
At that time, like,
yeah.
I mean, just to have recording of a band that's doing that sort of thing, I feel like
Exactly.
we're so fortunate to have had it even happen. And maybe that mindset would be similar to like what 100 Gex is doing now, right? It's just different because of how easy it is to sort of create that and get it to listeners' ears, right? Whereas back then it just seems like you just had to be very lucky, especially with something that wasn't like very popular and on the radio, and like the Beatles, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I don't know. I guess I do overall think of it that way. Like, it's just this lightning in a bottle moment of like showing us like a lot of the future of music all at once. But I don't know. I was just kind of struck by the, reading that essay, because I was kind of like, yeah, honestly, like some of these songs do sound like a little antiquated, like maybe on purpose, I just think of like I'll Be Your Mirror or something, or like There She Goes Again. Like they're just like these like simple little pop ditties that sound like the Ronettes should have done them in the early 60s or something like that. And yet they're kind of reinventing it. But, and I agree that it's like, maybe we think it's so forward looking just because we've now seen like the future. And maybe if you were listening in 1967, you'd be like, why are they doing like early 60s music? So yeah, thanks again for the email, Luke. I think it's an interesting way to think about it. I'm sure we'll end up doing a kind of Velvet Underground episode one of these days.
Oh yeah, that'd be nice. All right, well, that's enough for this week. I got to get to my first at-home streaming concert in the age of COVID. Going to see Nick Cave tonight. So what do you think? We'd love to read your thoughts on the air. You can email us popshieldpod@gmail.com. Next episode, maybe there'll be a Kanye album. Probably not. We'll see. So if you like the show, help us out by subscribing. Leave us a 5-star review wherever you get your podcast. Stay connected. Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, all that junk is at PopShieldPod. And we'll see you in 2 weeks.
See ya.
So long.